Welcome to an evening with Disabled Hikers founder Syren Nagakyrie, presented by Treeline Review.
My name is Liz Thomas. I am co-founder of Treeline Review, along with Naomi, who is also here and will be helping with the Q&A at the end of this event. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and where you're calling in from. Treeline Review is a gear review website that makes gear reviews for the rest of us, those of us who haven't seen ourselves reflected in traditional outdoor media. We build inclusive and beginner-friendly outdoor gear stories that focus on representation and being better stewards of this planet. One thing that makes us a little bit different is we're objective, we have no ads, we're 100% reader supported, we're not sponsored by gear companies. So that means to help continue our mission, when you purchase items online through links on our website, at no additional cost to you, it helps support our mission. So when you decide to purchase Syren's book after hearing this wonderful talk, you can find a link to bookshop.org or REI or one of the many other book retailers that sell Syren's book, and consider using one of our links to do that to support both of our good work. So before we start, we want to let you know we will be recording this webinar so that we can share Syren's talk with those of us who were unable to make it. And so many people wrote in and said, oh, we're so excited about this. That's something we're very excited to be able to do. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Syren Nagakyrie, a longtime disabled activist and community builder who is committed to an outdoors culture transformed by fair representation, accessibility, and justice for people who are often marginalized outdoors. They are the author of Disabled Hikers Guide to Washington and Oregon, Outdoor Adventures accessible by car, wheelchair, and foot by Falcon Guides. We'd like to ask if you have questions during the event, please save them until the end. There will be time at the end after the talk where we will be asking questions, and we'll also be utilizing the chat during that time as well. Thank you so much. And we're very, very much forward looking to having Syren here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and thanks for hosting and providing this space for us to come together and talk a little bit. I will give me a moment to share my screen here. Right, so yeah, I am the founder of Disabled Hikers. Thank you again for being here this evening and sharing some time with us. Really excited to be here. I am calling in from the traditional lands of the Quileute Nation, which is Forks, Washington, on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. A little bit about accessibility in this presentation. So I will try to describe everything that is shown on these slides and read the content of the slides. Sometimes I forget, so if there is something that I miss, feel free to pop into the chat and we'll cover that. We'll be talking a little bit about, of course, my background, how I got started, the formation of Disabled Hikers, and then going into the book and how to provide accessible trail information for folks and what that information looks like, specifically within the context of the book, but also how you can provide that to your communities as well. Again, I'm Syren Nagakyrie. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a white, queer, non-binary person with multiple disabilities and chronic illnesses. Here on the right, there's a photo of me with my little dog, Benji, who is a very important part of my life. And we're standing on an overlook outside of Leavenworth, Washington, which the golden aspens or larches, golden larches in the background. This was really just a really meaningful moment for me because, for me, nature is really just this place of, it has given me a real sense of belonging. For so much of my life, I felt very excluded from, from society, from my peers, and from the outdoors in general. And I went through a lot of periods of my life where, I was experiencing chronic illness and symptoms of my disabilities, and just wasn't really able to go out and be with my peers and do the type of typical childlike activities that people did. I also grew up pretty poor and with disabled parents. So I didn't really have the opportunity to go out and do things like camping or road trips or summer vacations or things like that. But what I was able to do and did a lot of was just hanging out in my yard during the day, and really just paying attention to the plants and the flowers and the birds and the bugs that surrounded me every day, and just watching those experiences and the variety of ways that bodies and forms exist in nature really informed my experience and the way that I view and experience my own disability. Seeing the ways that nature adapts to various circumstances, the ways that people really kind of go out and seek out what is considered quote unquote unusual in nature. So we see these examples of disability, of genetic difference, and these are the things that people really tend to want to seek out and find to be incredible. And that experiencing that on the one hand, but then also experiencing, on the other, that disability can be so shunned was really, really informative for me. So, I often go outside to really just lean into and brace against nature and see a lot of this reflected back to me, and just really having a place to feel more comfort when I'm having these experiences of illness and disability and trauma. And, again, seeing all of that reflected back to me, especially as, the climate crisis accelerates and the environment itself becomes increasingly disabled, having that kind of reciprocal relationship, I feel like can really help inform us as people who are outdoor enthusiasts, who care about the environment, who want to address climate change and these issues, that really seeing that reciprocal engagement is really important. So, not only, for example, do more people become disabled as the climate crisis continues, more people experience an exacerbation of disability, but we're also seeing these experiences of disability in the landscape, and also the ways that we all adapt and overcome that in various forms. So, it's really, I feel like there's so much that is wrapped up in disability and the landscape, and really exploring that is really important. So as I mentioned, I really felt really excluded from a lot of my peers growing up, and I wasn't able to do things like going out for camping trips and things like that. But I did try Girl Scout. Of course, I had physical education requirements in school, like a lot of us had, and just kept encountering all of these really kind of negative experiences and perceptions about me and disability as I was growing up. So I really kind of was often just told, like, oh, you can just stay behind, just sit this one out. It's okay. You won't be penalized for it, but just stay over here and out of the way. So that really, kind of continued throughout a lot of my life. And then as I entered community college this was probably like, I don't know, early to mid aughts, and I enrolled in a few natural science courses because, again, I was really interested in learning more about the natural world and what these experiences meant for me. So I enrolled in this class and had the opportunity for the first time in my life to get out of Florida and go experience a brand new landscape, which was the Grand Canyon. And, we were out on this trip, and, a big group of my classmates, and we were here. This is a photo looking down into the entrance to a cave. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's quite a bit of snow on the ground, on the rocks, and there's a couple of people who are on the rocks climbing down into this cave. So of course we're there, and everyone's excited and having a good time, and like really just excited to have this new experience. And we get to this place, and the teacher's like, all right, let's go down into this cave. And it's like, obviously, like I can't do this. This is not something that I'm able to do. So the professor was just like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Just sit here and wait for us to get back. I was like, okay. So, I just sit there, like hang out while everyone else went and did this activity. But in that moment, I was just sitting there, basically alone in the desert and sitting on this rock and looking around me in this totally, unknown landscape to me. And was just, it was a tense moment for sure of like feeling excluded, but also like having this moment of quiet to just really lean into that experience and what it meant. And, just really paying attention to the landscape and everything that surrounded me. And, it was, really meaningful experience. And later on, I was, talking with my classmates, about what they experienced through all of that. And basically, they really didn't have anything meaningful to share about the experience. Like they all talked about like having a good time together, but as far as like what they learned or how they connected with the environment, they just didn't really have anything meaningful about that. So that was, kind of one of the first times I really kind of realized that like this slower way of being in the outdoors was also incredibly meaningful. So as I really kind of continued leaning into those experiences and wanting to find more ways to be able to enjoy the outdoors and something that was meaningful for me, I enrolled in an herbal school program in like 2008-ish. I moved to Western North Carolina and enrolled in this 2-year program. And it was really kind of the first opportunity I had to really connect with people and plants in a really meaningful way and these kind of slower experiences. If you've ever been on a plant walk or anything like that, you know that it can be a very slow experience and everyone's kind of hanging out, nerding out on plants and, traveling a short distance. And, that was kind of my first time of like really being in that kind of environment and situation, but at the same time, I was still very often told like, if you can't do this, it's okay. You can stay behind. Don't worry about it. I would ask for information about the hikes that we would be doing and where we would be going and the conditions, and just wasn't really receiving any real support or information. So I was still, experiencing those challenges, but definitely it was the first opportunity I had to really kind of try to find a sense of belonging and really start figuring out on my own what it meant to engage with the outdoors and with nature. Here on the right, there's a photo of me kind of kneeling down in this huge patch of St. John's wort, which is a beautiful yellow flower that grows on the open hillsides. And it was just really this, again, a moment that just kind of allowed me to kind of just accept who I was and how I experienced the outdoors. So fast forward, decade or so, and in late 2017, I moved to the Olympic Peninsula in Northwest Washington State, and it's an incredible area, Olympic National Park and National Forest, and there's old growth rainforest and rocky coastlines and mountains, and really a little bit of everything that you could ask for in an environment. And I was really excited to start experiencing this and, going out and having these new experiences and figuring out what it meant for me. So I started doing, lots of trail research and figuring out where I could go and what that looked like. And one day I started out in the Quinault rainforest and started a new segment of a trail system that I had done before, but I hadn't done this particular segment yet. And, again, I'd done tons of research about it to make sure it was something I thought I would be able to do. And immediately got out there and encountered tons of obstacles and barriers, like steep drop-offs and rocky slopes and steep stairs and all of these things that weren't included in anything that I read anywhere. And, it was really, really kind of a dangerous situation for me. And I was, kind of having to continue along because it would have been just as difficult to turn back. So I just kept going. I was increasingly getting, in pain and fatigue and frustrated. And finally, I ended at this bridge over a waterfall that you see here on the right, and was just standing there, kind of leaning against this bridge and just feeling exhausted and in pain and so frustrated. But in that moment, like inspiration struck, and I said, why don't I do something about this? And, I went home and wrote up a quick blog post and trail guide about my experience there, and put it up on a quick WordPress blog, and said Disabled Hikers Trail Guides, and Disabled Hikers was born from there. And we really almost immediately started getting traction. We were getting media mentions and all of that pretty much right away, which I was admittedly not prepared for, but pretty excited about. And, from there, we grew the blog, the social media community, started doing group hikes, and it really has blossomed in ways that I never expected. So here's a quote. It says, "There is no one right way for water to flow, and there is no one right way for my body to be either." And I think, for me, it's really about the ways that nature resists these binaries and these strict categorizations and this idea that there's only one right way to do or to be. Nature isn't like that, and neither are our bodies, and neither should we expect each other to be. There's a myriad of ways for water to flow. Sometimes it overflows, sometimes it's in a drought, sometimes it flows north, sometimes south, sometimes slow, sometimes fast, and it's all okay and acceptable. So disabled hikers, what do we do? On the left-hand side here, there's a drawing that features 3 disabled folks in the outdoor environment. And, our mission is to build disability community and justice in the outdoors with a vision of an outdoors culture transformed by access, representation, and justice for disabled and all other historically marginalized people. We do a lot of work in the community, and we do a lot of advocacy, create a lot of resources, events, trainings, consultations. We work with a variety of parks and other outdoor organizations to really help increase access and inclusion for disabled folks. We work with a lot of brands, really have a broad variety of things that we do, and we're going to be expanding to include a disabled hikers network and leadership development programs, starting to do more group hikes and all of that. So we're really excited about where we're going. But really at the core of it all is community. And here there's 3 photos of, a variety of groups of folks from some of our group hikes. And for us, it really is that being community-led piece, and that the resources and the things that we provide are by and for disabled folks. And it's really kind of flipping the common narrative that we find in a lot of, kind of disability service organizations, is that, it's non-disabled people doing things for disabled people. But we really flip that. For us, it is disabled folks are the experts. We are the leaders. We are perfectly capable of, figuring these things out for and with each other. And, we don't always need non-disabled folks to lead the way and show us how it's done. It's really about that empowerment and autonomy and really respecting the broad variety of experiences of disability. So the book, how did we get here? It really was, again, one of those kind of like coincidental synchronous things. There was an article about disabled hikers in Outside magazine, and someone from Falcon Guides read that, and at the end of it, I had mentioned, I'm writing these trail guides. I would love to write a book one day. I've been a writer for a long time. I've been writing since I was a kid. And someone from Falcon saw that and reached out to me and said, we'd love to work with you on that. And I was like, okay, well, I said someday. I didn't mean like right now, but all right, cool, let's do it. So, here we are. And on the left here, there's a cover photo of the Disabled Hikers Guide to Western Washington and Oregon, outdoor adventures, accessible by car, wheelchair, and foot. And there's a photo, this is by, the photo is actually by Scott Kranz, and it's of Mount Chookson with Picture Lake in the foreground. And it really is very much a groundbreaking book. It's the first book that I know of that's been written by a disabled person for the broad variety of disabled folks. It includes, scenic drives and wheelchair accessible trails, wheelchair hikeable trails, foot trails that are suitable for disabled folks. And it utilizes a rating system and really detailed trail information, which we'll talk about a little more. And every trail in this book has been personally assessed by me. I've done tons of research, gone out and hiked every trail, done all the physical assessments and all of that to really create these very detailed guides. So the process of writing this book was really a 2-year process. I signed the contract in, I guess it was January of 2020. And then, as we all know, 3 months later, the world changed. And, we entered the pandemic, and then there was record-breaking wildfires and snowstorms and all of that. That was definitely unexpected and really complicated a lot of the process. But we got there. So it was very much a 2-year fellowship and really diving into the lack of accessibility that is out there, not only in the trails, but in the information that is available and how people understand disability and accessibility in the outdoors. And then on the left here, I like to show this photo. It's a screenshot of a Google map with a bunch of color-coded different icons representing different hikes and things like that on the trail. And this is just a small snapshot of like the process of trying to find all this information, organize it in a way that makes sense. And also, guidebooks, they need to be written in a certain way with a broad enough variety and trails dispersed in a variety of locations. So finding all of that fits within the guidelines was definitely a huge challenge. And I think I probably hiked over 150 trails in the process of writing this book. So it starts with tons of research. Every trail probably requires like 2 to 3 hours of research, trying to track down as much information about that trail as possible, so that first I can decide whether or not it's something I can do, and then whether or not it will be something that would be suitable for the book to create a resource about. But then I still have to go out and hike it and do the assessment. And of the trails I hike, a good half of them still end up being not as accessible as I thought they were going to be based on the research. And then of those ones that are, still only maybe half of those are really suitable to include in a guidebook. So it's definitely not as simple as a typical guidebook. There's a lot more involved in this, in research and planning and the hiking process. So creating something new, what I encountered along the way, on the right-hand side here, there's a photo of me pointing at a trail map for the Icicle Gorge Trail. Really ultimately what I realized through the process of writing this was that I needed the thing that I was creating to be able to create the thing. And that's really has been, something that has been true for a lot of the work that I've done. Trying to create something that you need to exist in the world is both a really meaningful thing and a very challenging thing. And, really figuring out like how much bad information is out there and how much confusion and lack of awareness there was out there about accessibility, again, was just really eye-opening to me in a lot of ways. So I wanted to share a couple of examples of the kinds of things that I encountered while doing some of this research. A couple of trail examples here. So Cape Flattery on the left is a photo with a multiple stepped boardwalk with some stairs. This trail is, it's on Macaw land. It's the most northwest point of the contiguous United States. And it's noted as easy pretty much everywhere that you look. But it has 200 feet of elevation change and near 100 steps in 3/4 of a mile, which is not easy for anyone really who has mobility or balance or respiratory issues or even just bad knees. And then to actually get to the view that everyone talks about, you have to climb up a steep ladder to this platform or step to the very edge of the cliff, which is not accessible for a lot of folks either. And then Marimere Falls, this is also in Olympic National Park at Lake Crescent. This one is sometimes kind of ridiculed as a tourist and family friendly trail, which, means, oh, it's not worth it for any real hiker, quote unquote, which of course I disagree with. But the trail is really not that easy at all. And there is a short portion that people consider accessible, but it still can be pretty difficult, especially if you don't have an adapted wheelchair. And then the rest of the trail to actually get to the waterfall gains over 250 feet in less than half a mile, and there's over 120 stairs. So that's definitely not easy for me and a lot of folks. So what is it that makes this book unique, and what kind of information do we cover? And again, it's very much about providing that really detailed, clear information, being as detailed as possible. So I mentioned earlier about the unique rating that is in the book that I created, and I call this the spoon rating. It's based on spoon theory, which is a kind of a symbol or a metaphor created by Christine Mizrahin-Dino. I always mispronounce her last name. And it, in short, it's a metaphor. She starts with a certain number of spoons and discusses the amount of spoons or energy that every activity requires to get through the day. So this is really kind of a very well-known part of disability culture. So I wanted to take an aspect of disability culture and apply that to this resource so that it would be meaningful to more folks, and to provide a really very objective and specific rating for trails. So it kind of combines both a quote unquote difficulty rating with accessibility and a quality rating, and try to do that in a much more objective way. So, we start with 2 spoons. It's 0 to 2 miles, level and even, with grades under 8%, paved, very easy to navigate, probably wheelchair accessible. 2 spoons, 1 to 3 miles, short grades up to 12%, firm but unpaved surface with no obstacles. Access takes a little planning, probably wheelchair hikeable. 3 spoons, 2 to 4 miles, generally gentle elevation changes, short grades up to 20%. Firm surface, minimal obstacles, possibly wheelchair hikeable. 4 spoons, 3 to 5 miles, prolonged grades of 10 to 15%, elevation changes over 500 feet or longer than half a mile. Soft surface with obstacles, requires advanced planning or basic trail map reading. 5 spoons, 5+ miles, prolonged grades 15 to 20%, elevation changes 1,000 feet or longer than 1 mile. Trail has many obstacles, requires extensive planning or navigation. Now, within these ratings, like any one of these factors can shift, and it may not change the overall rating. And here, I've really tried to, for example, like a short grade is anything less than 30 feet, and a prolonged grade is anything over 30 feet, 100 feet. And then really trying to parse out, being very specific about what wheelchair accessible and wheelchair hikeable means. Wheelchair accessible trails, there's very specific guidelines about what that means. So trails that meet all of those are defined as a specifically wheelchair accessible trail. But then there's lots of different types of wheelchairs. Wheelchair users have a variety of experience level, comfort, access to equipment again. So all of that still influences how accessible a trail may be for someone. So a trail may still be wheelchair hikeable if they have, adapted equipment, if they are an experienced wheelchair hiker. So including all of that information in there is really important too. So here we go, with Marimere Falls as an explanation of, how I wrote about this as opposed to what is very common. There's a lot of text here. I won't take the time to read all of it. I apologize for that, but so I rated it, as a 2 spoons for the first half mile, which is wheelchair hikeable and gains under 100 feet in elevation. The surface is compact earth and gravel, but there are 2 areas of incline and uneven ground that may be difficult. And then the hike description goes into more detail about that. And then for me, it's 5 spoons for the complete hike to the falls, which is the most difficult. It gains, again, 250+ feet in less than half a mile. And then, going into the max grade for each section of trail, what they'll encounter along the way. And then, again, as we'll talk about, the actual hiking guide goes into all of this in much more detail. So here's another example, Happy Creek Nature Trail. This is located on Washington Highway 20 in the North Cascades. This is a trail that's really often overlooked as being kind of not worth it. It's a short boardwalk that's located right off the highway, but it is fully wheelchair accessible and it's really lovely. And there's lots of places to sit and enjoy the babbling creek, and there's some old growth forest. It also is kind of the access point to a longer, more difficult trail. So people who do start here often just kind of continue on to that more difficult trail and don't take the time to enjoy this short boardwalk. So it is very accessible, but then here on the right in the description, there's some description about the parking lot and the accessible parking there. So what often happens is even on these accessible trails, there may be a lack of truly accessible parking. So there's a couple of accessible parking spots here. They do not have the striped access aisles that allow for someone using a wheelchair to load and offload. So I give information about possibly being able to use the right parking spot, which has enough space in front of the toilets, or there's a long parallel spot that you could offload basically into the driveway, which is, less than ideal, but providing those kind of options and information is important. June Lake, this is another example located in Washington State near Mount St. Helens. It is a quote unquote easier portion of a trail that is the access point to a longer, more difficult backpacking trail. So that loops around the mountain. So again, people will often use this just to access that backpacking trail, but they don't share information about this shorter section of the trail that is easier and more accessible for a lot of folks. And it still ends at this really beautiful lake with a waterfall that tumbles down the basalt cliffs. Nice little picnic spot. It's even a nice little fairly easy backcountry camping opportunity for folks. So things like this, where there are portions of the trail that may be more accessible, it's really important to provide that information as well. And then Discovery Park Loop. This is in Discovery Park in Seattle, and it's a urban park. And again, a lot of people either they kind of dismiss city parks as not really being worth it, or just kind of that place you go to real quickly after work, and they don't see them as necessarily valuable in and of themselves. But also a lot of folks assume that city parks are all very accessible and easy for everyone to access, and that's also not true. The main Discovery Park Loop Trail I rated it as a 3 spoons. There's some difficult areas on there, and really within the park there is no designated wheelchair accessible trail anywhere in the park, but they do offer some accommodations around being able to book a shuttle or get a pass to drive down to the beach, so that can be more accessible for folks. But again, there's some really limited options there as well. So going into a little more detail about the trail information that is in the book, and that hopefully this inspires you to think about trails a little differently, and how to provide this information to people and the kind of information that you should be looking for. So there's of course the trail type. This can be an out or back, so it's you go out one way and travel back in the same direction, or there's a loop. You travel in the same direction one way. There's often a lot of discussion within hiking community about whether out and backs or loops are better. And personally, for me, I prefer out and backs because I know what to expect on the way back, and I can kind of relax into the experience a little more. Plus, it's always different to see it from a different angle. So, and then the distance, the entire length in miles for the trail. So it's, if it's an out and back, it's how long is it to get there and back, but also what distances could you go and turn around and still have, a good experience. Providing the starting elevation and the total elevation gain, and also when possible, the elevation loss. Sometimes, depending on what app you're using or anything like that, that can be more difficult to capture, but, providing that both the total gain and where that gain happens, there's a big difference between gaining, 500 feet in half a mile or 500 feet in 2 miles. So, being very clear about what that means, and including that max grade, which means that steepest section of the trail, again, that's longer than 5 feet. And, that can make a big difference for folks, not only people who use wheelchairs and need to know whether their wheelchair will be able to navigate that, but, anyone who, uses mobility equipment, who needs to, again, needs to consider that information. And then max cross slope, this is the steepness of the trail on the horizontal axis or from the inside to the outside or vice versa. And this is often left out, but it's really important for folks who use wheelchairs, anyone who has an unsteady gait, anyone who uses mobility equipment, difference in limb length, all of that can really make a trail with a steep cross slope really difficult to travel on. So it's important to measure that as well. And then the width, the typical width of the path, and that, again, is also, of course, a factor for wheelchair users. And again, there's a variety of types of wheelchairs out there. The minimum requirement for a wheelchair is 32 to 36 inches, but there's a lot of adapted chairs out there that need a much wider area, and also adapted bikes need a much wider path. So, and, of course, walking on a narrow trail can be really difficult, especially, if you have any mobility challenges. So that's important to know. And then the typical surface, this is also referred to as the tread of the trail. So it could be natural, it could be paved, it could be gravel, it could be rock, any combination of that. And, again, that's important to know. And it also feeds into obstacles and, how firm that surface is going to be, whether it's going to be something that is muddy, something that is slippery, all of that is important to know. Then trail users, this can be, of course, other hikers, runners, bikers, horseback riders. And, I think sometimes people kind of overlook this, but it is really important. For me, I need to know if I'm going to be sharing that trail with a mountain biker who is, traveling much faster than I am. I may not be able to get out of the way quickly enough for a bike who's coming quickly down a trail. So, just having that information up front so I can decide if it's something that I want to deal with that day is really important. And then, of course, season, schedule, when's the best or safest time to experience the trail, what kind of water is available, and that includes if there's water fountains, if there's, places to fill a water bottle, or if it's surface water and, that needs to be filtered or treated. Knowing whether or not water is available is really important to me, even on just a short day hike, that's a couple of miles long. With my disabilities, I have to keep very hydrated, and I'm unable to carry enough water often to really meet that need. So knowing whether or not I'll have access to water is really important. Knowing if there's restrooms, benches along a trail are really important. Any place to sit down, picnic tables, all of that. Dog friendly. Of course, service animals are allowed anywhere on any trail unless the land manager has specifically done a study to say that it would be too damaging, too much of an imposition on the environment. But other than that, which is an intensive process, service animals are allowed anywhere and everywhere that their handlers are. So that aside, knowing whether or not pets are allowed and whether it's appropriate for pets to go, there are lots of trails that they are allowed but may not be the best idea for a variety of reasons. So that's important. And then cell reception. A lot of people, kind of have this idea that you go into the wilderness to disconnect. But for me, I need to know whether or not I'm going to have access to a cell phone if I run into issues. So that's important. And being really clear about passes and entry fees. I know that can be very confusing depending on where you are, but so being really clear about that. And then being really clear about how to find that trailhead, so that includes directions there. And then once you're in the parking lot, exactly orienting someone to finding that trailhead and where they can find the information and a map and things like that. And of course, land acknowledgements are incredibly important. The book includes really thorough land acknowledgements. All of my intro material includes information. So being really intentful and meaningful about that is important. And again, the hike, really detailed trail description for the entire length of the trail that covers all of the above information and more. It's really very much a step-by-step or a roll-by-roll guide. I feel like people sometimes think if I give all of the information about this trail, it's going to ruin the experience for someone, but it really doesn't. It helps me prepare more so that I can really, lean into the experience more and actually enjoy it. And then, whenever possible, of course, in this book, I've included really detailed maps and elevation profiles. I remember elevation profiles used to be included in a lot of guidebooks, and they don't include them often anymore, but I told them it was very important for it to be in this book. So they are there, and you can kind of view, there's information in there about how to view elevation profiles, but in short, they're kind of like a graph that show the elevation at any point on the trail. So it's not an exact replica of the elevation of the trail, but it does kind of give you a general idea of, what the steepness and the grade will be. So again, I, just hope that this guide really, helps everyone to get out there and enjoy the outdoors, whether you're driving or wheeling or hiking or strolling or just sitting on a park bench. There's lots of things in here that just are nice places for a picnic or to go hang out. It's all valid and important, and everyone belongs outdoors. And, again, I really hope that through these experiences of, sharing access and disabled perspectives, that we can really help shift more of this outdoor culture. Thank you. You can find more on the website at disabledhikers.com. You can reach me at syren@disabledhikers.com. And we are on Facebook and Instagram at Disabled Hikers. So please follow us if you don't. So we've got 15 minutes or so for questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Syren. That was wonderful. Gotten some great questions and comments in the chat. What is the difference between wheelchair accessible and wheelchair hikeable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, again, the wheelchair accessible has really clear guidelines specifically. So the Americans with Disabilities Act actually doesn't cover trails. Specifically, the Architectural Barriers Act does, which technically only applies to federal funded lands. That's kind of a tangent, but those guidelines are there to be able to compare to. So a wheelchair accessible trail will meet all of those guidelines, such as being paved, firm, grades under generally 5 to 8%. And then wheelchair hikeable trails, perhaps, for example, may have a steeper grade or an unpaved surface, some rocks, some obstacles, things like that. But if you are using an adapted wheelchair or are an experienced wheelchair hiker, it can still be accessible to you. So some of how to know the difference just is a little bit of just experience and talking with the community and some subjectivity to that. But I do think it is important to understand that there are, again, a broad variety of wheelchair users who are also hikers, and what that means for folks.
One more question about the spoons rating. Could you explain sort of the history of that? Sort of what that actually means.
Yeah, so the spoon theory by Christine Miserandino, and again, that's you can Google that and read her article about it. I probably won't describe it as well as the full article, but it is kind of this idea that a lot of folks who are disabled or chronically ill have to ration their energy throughout the day and kind of start the day, for example, with 10 spoons. And every activity that I do requires a certain number of spoons. So getting up and getting dressed, that's 2 spoons. Going to work, that's 5 spoons. Cooking a meal, that's 2 spoons. So, kind of taking that idea of this like symbol for disability and chronic illness, again, which has become really kind of an important part of disability culture. Like you say, spoon theory in a room full of disabled or chronically ill folks, like everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm low on spoons today. So kind of taking that idea and applying it to a quote unquote difficulty rating or an accessibility rating. And for example, the easiest hike may only require 1 spoons of your energy for the day. A more difficult hike will require 3 to 5 spoons of your energy for the day. So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
How about any recommendations for finding out how accessible an area is when you're planning a vacation? The national parks, for example.
hmm Yeah, it can definitely be a challenge. So, but the National Parks Service does have an accessibility section on their website. Unfortunately, it's not really standardized, and every park has different information and different quality of information. But if you are on the national park webpage, there's always a thing, I think it's under plan your visits and then accessibility, and you'll be able to find some accessibility information on there. But honestly, just doing a ton of Googling and, really like, this national park accessibility, and then reading things like, guides from, for example, like trail associations will often have some information, reading other blogs, and, joining local Facebook groups and asking for information there. It's all kind of some steps you can take.
Did you consider including other kinds of disabilities such as neurodivergence and people with sensory needs such as light and sound, like how loud a trail is or how much light exposure there is?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm neurodivergent myself, so I always try to include that information. I think probably for sure I could have done a little better job of it with this book, and I'm planning on doing that. The next book will be for Northern California, so I'll be a little more specific about that. But for sure, there's information about, for example, being really clear about any places where, you may get confused or lost, noting if there's any, loud or potential for loud or unexpected noises, like, trains or anything like that. So there's some information in there about that.
Good, that's good to hear. Someone also mentioned that the wider trails are good for people with PTSD. So that's helpful information as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing where the spots are where you can like really kind of step off trail and, kind of get off of the main trail and where to sit and things like that.
Where can you buy the Southwest Washington and Oregon guide? I assume it's Amazon, all major retailers.
Yep. Yeah. Anywhere books are sold. Yeah. And I know there's a link to it here on the event with Treeline Review. So for sure you can get it there. You can get it on our website. And it's should be more available in bookstores now. It did initially sell out within the first 2 weeks of being released. But it's been second printing is done, so it should be out there now, hopefully.
Do you know if libraries usually stock books like that?
Yeah, actually, there's been a lot of interest from libraries, which made me really happy. I'm a big library nerd, so yeah, a lot of the libraries around here have copies.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and there is also a Kindle version too, and of course that enables Kindle audio reading and all of that.
Here's another one. I'm curious if any parks reached out or if there was any collaboration towards making better accessibility, such as better parking, while you did the research or after the book came out? Yeah,
I've definitely have worked with a lot of parks throughout this whole process. Definitely, I think there's probably been a little more interest since the book was published, which was to be expected. But yeah, so for example, like I worked with Olympic National Park to create trail guides for all of their front country trails. So that's up on the website. I have lots of meetings with various parks and things like that to improve access. So, yeah.
Are you planning a guide for Eastern Washington?
Yes, hopefully one day. I'm working on Northern California right now. And then, yeah, we'll see what comes next. Of course, each guide takes me easily 1 to 2 years to write. So there's only so many I can do at a time, but we are hoping to do this training and leadership development program to train more folks on doing this so that, they have the opportunities to write more guides for their areas. So.
And I believe you said Northern California is also a possibility. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm working on Northern California now. That should be out spring 2024.
I love the mention of the benches on the trails. It's so important for so many people. Do you also mention rocks that can be used to sit on and rest, as many people can't sit on the ground and get back up?
Yeah. Nice rocks, nice logs, trees to sit on, anywhere that I can take a seat.
Do you have plans to involve more perspectives across the country for other areas too?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we're working on the Disabled Hikers Network and the Leadership Development Program, which will be an opportunity for folks, from everywhere to come together and learn and share information and develop more leadership. Yeah, and of course, we have our social media, Instagram, we have a Facebook group. All of those are good ways to connect with other people too.
Can you talk more about the trainings?
Yeah, I mean, we're still working on working on creating them. So for sure I'd say like follow us online, sign up for the newsletter, things like that to stay up to date on those. But we'll be offering a variety of opportunities, training opportunities that will start with, creating a variety of like multiple accessible ways to do these trail assessments and reviews for a variety of disabled folks to be able to do that. And, teaching how to do the trail assessments, how to write guides, how to do the advocacy work, how to work with parks and organizations and all of that, so that, so that more folks can do this in their own communities.
And we're right at 6:00 p.m. Thank you so much, Syren, and thank you everyone for being part of this event. It was so great to have you here and to learn more about the book. And just as a reminder, everyone go out and get a copy of Syren's book while they're available as part of the second printing. And we'll also have this available as a recording as well for those of you who are unable to attend or who have friends who you think would be interested in seeing this talk. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.